welcome back to our channel. We are here about to read our second half of the Esther story, and we're gonna give you guys a few minutes to get in here. I'm sending a message right now to inform everyone we're live. So Mercedes, give us a breakdown. How's your week been? What's been your favorite thing you've done this week?
My week's been good. It's been busy. I've been working a lot with the family, which has been fun. I think my favorite thing we've done this week so far is painting the T-Rex. Has been really fun to do as a family.
Yeah.
Which, for all of y'all who may not know, we were working at a place called Water World, and we still are. That's why I look a little pooped. Anyways, and what I mean by repainting the T-Rex is we were hired to repair the rips and tears and damages that occurred to the T-Rex animatronic at the very end of Voyage to the Center of the Earth at Waterworld. It just had some normal wear and tear, and there was an instance where it malfunctioned and it actually tore into some of its steel frame and ripped part of its face off. And so it wasn't
morbid.
It sounds horrible. It sounds worse than it was. There was some bad cracks and stuff, but it wasn't hard to fix. So I think doing that as a family was my favorite.
Also, we are still getting ready. So for those who are just joining, we're about to start.
Yeah. So I think that was my favorite thing. Just being able to hang out with Mom while we were patching them, and then trying to figure out how to paint it, and then Dad swooping in with his amazing airbrush skills. It was really fun.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm trying to share
the
link. Sorry, guys.
You don't need to be sorry. No one's here currently.
We had some pop in and pop out because we must be boring talking about our life.
No, I think it was you looking at the link. It's okay.
No, I wasn't on the link. Oh, you're right. No, I didn't open it.
It's okay.
Anyway.
So, we are today going to be reading the second and final part of the story of Esther. Last week we read the first 5 chapters, and this week we are reading the last 5 chapters. There's 10 chapters in total. I would definitely encourage y'all to watch our live stream from last week or read the first part of Esther before getting into the remainder of the story today, if you haven't. I know that we also had some people who were watching with us last week that couldn't wait because the story got too good, so they read the story on. I know Grandma Bug did that, which was really cool. And so I'm excited to finish reading it here with you today.
Yeah. Which I've stayed spoiler-free, so you're going to see my uncut reactions, which will be fun.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to say for Bible story.
I know.
I'm pretty sure you wouldn't. I'm going to say this. I know for a fact you've been exposed to this story somehow, some way. But it's okay not to remember the details of it.
That's fair. So yeah, if anybody else is joining, make sure to comment as we go. But we're going to start our stream because we are pretty tired. So we're going to make sure that we go through this and have good conversations. But then we might log off a couple minutes early just so that way we can go to bed because we're pretty pooped. So, why don't you say, Sadie? Why don't you pray for getting us in real quick?
For what?
Getting us in, getting us started.
Oh, starting? Okay.
And there we go.
All right. Thank you, Father, so much for this wonderful day and blessing us with the ability to do these Bible studies and just read your word together as siblings in Christ. Go before us as we read and just help us have revelation and understanding of what you are saying, Lord, and the story we're about to read. Thank you so much, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we're going to get started with our amazing Bible study. And I'm trying out a new thing here. Not sure I like it so far. So I'm going to... Where'd our background go? I don't know.
Media and assets.
Let's see. Well, here, I got this. Don't worry about that. I'll get it.
I know.
That's crazy.
We were about to start reading Esther 6. Matt is just checking
we were
on
just
some
getting
details.
our thing working. That'll work. This will work. It's a cute new background. It'll work. Okay.
So do you want to read first?
I'll go ahead and read first. But just to recap everybody. So Esther just had a conversation. We could probably go back here a second. Down here it said that Esther said, "My petition, my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet. I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." So then Haman goes out and brags about he has been invited to a banquet with him, the king, Esther, and himself. And so we're going to start our reading today in the middle of this tension that's building, where Esther is having to have a conversation with the king and about how she wants to save the people of Israel, and Haman is wanting to murder him. So there's a really tense conversation coming soon.
And her nationality is still a secret. So he doesn't know that she's an Israelite.
Correct. So, Esther 6, Mordecai honored. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. "Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" "Go at once," the king commanded Haman. "Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh had said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
Isn't that funny?
This is hilarious.
So, like, how God turns the tables.
The timing is so funny. Like, he's literally sitting there going, "I'm praiseworthy. I'm invited to these things. Me, I. And then here comes God's timing going, "Right. Well, that pole you set up is not for him."
Spoilers.
I haven't even read it yet, so my assumption.
You read Haman impaled, and I can bet you know where this goes.
I wasn't reading that, but sure. Okay. Go ahead, Mercedes.
Esther 7. Haman impaled. So the king and Haman went to the queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbonah, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits, which is..."
It says
75 feet, stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided.
Oh my gosh. It's way more intense than I thought. I don't know what I was thinking. Like, I just thought, it was, oh, wow. Crazy. So one thing I like is that the king immediately believed and trusted Esther, which means that she had been working her way into being a very trustworthy person and woman, and had really truly represented what it means to be Christ-like in those things, to the point where when she said something, he took it dead serious. And so I think it's actually cool to see how even in those moments, how God worked through her and how God trained her and grew her into this perfect position for those moments, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I was about to say that it's really cool too, because it's also a good example and physical display of what it said in the beginning of the book about how God gave her favor with the king. And so the king, it's interesting. The king always has this sort of trust and favor and pleasantness with Esther. And so it's really cool to see how the Lord can do that.
Love it. All right, let's read Esther 8 and read the king's edict on behalf of the Jews. The same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king. For Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's state. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. "If it pleases the king," she said, "and if he regards me with favor, and thinks it's the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family?" King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked." At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebration. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Very interesting.
That's really cool. I think it's cool how the edict was how they can protect themselves, because they couldn't revoke what was already signed and sealed with the signet ring.
Right.
And so they added to it, basically saying, oh, if you have someone uprise against you as a Jewish person on this day, you are allowed to defend yourself and take the plunder of who attacked.
Yeah. And that's really cool, because we don't, like, I guess living in America, we get a very, like, basic version of that, in the sense that, like, we have the ability to bear arms and protect ourselves and to own property and manage it in our own way. And it's cool to see that there was a version of that done in a place where that never existed prior, and how it was done through people who were patient and understanding and gifted and wise through what God was doing in their life, which is cool as heck. And also how God provides for everybody and all of his people all the time, even when they don't know it.
Yeah.
By the way, just so everybody knows, this is not beer. This is seltzer water. All is well, because I've been drinking it like crazy.
Yeah, it's just Topo Chico.
Yeah.
All right, Esther 9. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemy of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them, and the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, and the governors and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the province, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parsadeth, Dalphon, Aspha, Poratha, Adela, Aridetha, Parmashista, Arisai, Aridai, and Viziatha, the 10 sons of Haman, sons of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's province also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other.
I just learned something new about you, Sadie. You can't say rural.
Rural.
Is that our Midwestern accent coming out?
It's rural.
It's rural.
Anyways, Purim established.
Rural. Okay.
Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the province of King Xerxes, near and far. to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written order that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews would come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons shall be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word pur, because everything written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them. The Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who join them should without fail observe these 2 days every year, in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by family and in every province and every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. So Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm the second letter concerning Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regards to their time of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in the records.
Wow. That's
crazy.
We have
one more chapter.
So basically, these 2 days represent the purge, basically, and the feast, like celebration. So, like,
it's actually more of like a freedom fight, because if you think about it, the Israelites, or the Jews as they're referred to, were actually enslaved because they were the lesser, and so that's why she hid her nationality when she was called to become queen. And so it was more of an uprising and a freedom fight that was allowed by the king, which was only granted because the great favor that God had put on Esther.
Wow. Pretty impactful. So
I guess the faithfulness of Mordecai.
Yeah, and I guess leading into this, I don't have a lot to say because it's just like very straightforward. It's a good story, and
real. I mean, why do we have to add to it? It's God's word, right?
So we'll go ahead. Esther 10, the greatness of Mordecai. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, in all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted. Are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Pretty cool. Well,
so wait, go scroll up. The annals and of the kings of Media and Persia. You know, I've been meaning to look into the
Book of Annals of the Kings of Media and Persia. Yeah. We're doing some research now. So yeah, I think my overall thoughts is Esther is pretty amazing. Definitely a woman of God to look up to for our generation and any generation reading her story. I think she's actually a great, iconic person to look up to. But I will say that it's cool to see how her and her uncle, right? It's her uncle?
Yeah.
Worked together to be this powerhouse dynamic that fought for the safety and the rights for the Jewish people, and did it in such a graceful, understanding way that God still protected them when plots of murderous intent were done behind the scenes. So I think it's pretty cool. What are you finding?
I don't know. I'm just really interested.
We'll have to do some more research and let you guys know what we find. It does mention the Chronicles in this book a few times. You're like, Sorry, guys. We just finished reading
Sorry.
Esther, and we were looking into the Book of Annals because it actually mentions in chapter 10 of Esther how this is written in the Book of Annals, and she's looking into it right now. So, but I'm going to give you guys a breakdown. Basically, Esther is awesome. So the overview of the whole story is that she was part of the women that were called to be a part of the king's selection of women to potentially become the queen. And so, but during that process, she was actually intentionally set aside because of her beauty and her knowledge and whatever the specific requirements were at the time, because they're much different than now. And when she was introduced to the king instantly fell in love with her. So she became the queen. But during that whole process, she actually hid her Jewish nationality from the king. So nobody knew she was Jewish. But her uncle, who's the one that was basically her mentor and guide throughout this whole journey, because her parents weren't there, her uncle was giving her advice as to what to do, what not to do, to help kind of keep her safe in that process, since all the women of a certain age bracket were required to go do this process. And he actually ends up running into one of the king's right-hand man. His name is Haman. And in that process, Haman ends up really getting mad at Mordecai, her uncle, Esther's uncle, bitter at Mordecai. And so Haman starts to plot to kill Mordecai, but he ends up getting even more. I feel like this is one of those things where it's like, when you hate something like a particular food, then you just wrap all of those kinds of particular foods together into a bracket and you just hate that type of food. I think it's very interesting where he did the same thing, where he's like, well, if Mordecai is this way, then I have to hate all of these people. And so he starts plotting a way to destroy and eradicate all of the Jewish people, a part of King Xerxes' kingdom. And so in that process, he is getting all egotistical because Esther and Mordecai have a conversation during that time. And Mordecai encourages her, because he learns of the plot, to basically have a conversation with the king, which is very no at the time unless he calls on you. And so she gracefully approaches the king, who has a high standard and appreciation and respect for Esther, and he agrees to have a conversation and attend her banquet that she's going to host the next day. But she also invites Haman as well. And so Haman goes around bragging to his family and friends that he's been invited to a personal banquet with the king and Esther, and decides that he's gonna, brag. And, as part of a celebration, his friends recommend him set up a pole so he can impale Mordecai in the morning and then go have this great old banquet. Well, that turns out to be completely opposite of what happens. And what we read today was basically Mordecai had actually won favor with the King Xerxes. And so King Xerxes wanted to honor him through basically as high honor as you can get, which he asked Haman about, funnily enough. And Haman is thinking that it's about him. So he's giving this huge, grandiose, retelling of what he would want if he was being honored by the king, right? And because King Xerxes is thinking of Mordecai, he has Haman go and do that for Mordecai, whom he deeply hates. And so it's a very funny kind of way of God's timing. It's just kind of funny timing. And then that night, Haman, already annoyed because he didn't get a chance to do what he wanted to Mordecai, is now attending Esther's banquet. And that's when Esther talks about who she is and what Haman has been plotting. And Haman, in his enrage, starts to try and basically attack Esther in a sense. And the King Xerxes had stormed out in a rage to go and start getting that stuff handled that Esther had asked for. And he comes back and sees Haman practically on top of Esther and freaks out. And so Haman impaled. He was trying to molest her, right?
No, he wasn't.
Was that the joke? Because that was the thing.
It wasn't
you were trying to basically...
No, it wasn't a joke. So so when we read it, it was Haman was begging the queen for his life, because she would have the power to save him at that point. And so he was begging so much that he fell on her couch.
And it looked
the king assumed he was trying to molest her.
And so the king was like, nope, even more so, nope, and impaled Haman on his own pole he set up for Mordecai. So in a kind of twisted way, that's that's super Romeo and Juliet story, in my opinion. But anyway, so then Haman's dead. King Xerxes ends up honoring Esther by giving her all of Haman's estate. And Esther ends up honoring Mordecai, and he becomes the king's right hand, basically, right?
Well, I think she gives Mordecai some sort of thing. Maybe
it's the estate. She gives him Haman's estate because she doesn't need it being the queen necessarily.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And then there's a decree that's sent out to replace the decree that Haman had tried to send out about killing all of the Jews. And it's like extra sealed. Like the king has a very specific way of things being done. And what we read in chapter 9 was how that whole process was to support the authority that the king had. But also it's cool because in that process, that's how intentional and deeply he took what Esther had to say. And so he's really fighting for her success, and he's willing to go to that crazy extent to allow for the request she made to be followed through with.
But you also have to keep in mind that the original decree was sent the same way. And so in chapter 9, when he says to do it that way, at the end of him saying that, the reason for it is because that kind of decree cannot be revoked even by him. And so he decreed that the people who hate the Israelites and the Jews can kill them. And now he's decreeing that the Israelites and Jews can fight to protect themselves and then take the plunder of whoever.
On the same day that other decree hit it.
Yeah. So he's not, because he's unable to undo what the decree was that he sent, he's adding another decree to save the Israelites.
And give them
but they have to do the work to fight for their lives.
But that's the cool part, is then the Jewish people they stand up for themselves, and they end up creating 2 honorable days called Purim that are still celebrated to this day in many Jewish cultures that we see now. And I think a lot of Christians respect out of this story as well, as they honor that. And it's kind of cool.
You could almost consider Christmas as that, because as when we were reading it, it was saying it's a time of Thanksgiving. You give gifts to the poor and you have feasts and celebration. And so it's basically like Christmas, in my opinion.
Yeah, like Thanksgiving and Christmas time.
No, Christmas, because it's the 12th month, right? So that's
right on the
December.
15th day-ish.
Yeah, so it's 10 days before our Christmas now. And so in my opinion, I would say most Christians do tend to celebrate that, because technically Jesus' birth is what we celebrate on Christmas. Whether that's the actual day or not, it doesn't matter. We're celebrating Jesus being born. And he technically was the beginning of the new revival and the new rebirth and the new freedom being brought in. It's the same thing as the Purim is what you were saying, the Purim, which was driven from the word lot. And so,
oh yeah, because they cast lot.
Yeah. It was so it's basically the new lot of freedom, and then Jesus. So yeah, I would say we technically still celebrate that.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool because overall the story and actually what happened is very honorable, in the sense that Esther, as a woman of God and a woman of faith, followed through with the hard choice, because she had this huge decision she had to make. And we talked about this last week too, but she actually was asked by Mordecai to have this conversation. And at the time, like, anybody who spoke to the king without permission was put to death. So this was a big deal for her to have to face. And the fact that she's still, in one conversation with Mordecai, according to what we know, she turned around and she went, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this. And just did it. And like, she still had a little bit of doubt at the beginning. She was like, don't you guys know the consequences? Don't you know the impact, the weight of what you're asking me? But she still did it anyway. And then God provided everything else.
And that's why it's important the people you surround yourself with.
Yep. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Do you have any other things you want to add to that, Mercedes? I feel like we covered it.
I don't have anything to add. I'm sorry. I've been a little zoned out today. I've been trying. I am very much paying attention. I'm very much there. I'm just zoned.
No worries.
But I don't have anything else to add. I feel like you were able to speak on it, and I was able to add in.
And honestly,
reading the word is...
This book was probably one of my favorites, because it's like a very well-rounded story, but also every single aspect shows how God's love and care and intentionality is woven into our lives. and how we get to really work, and we have to focus on those things, because even though it may be scary and times might be hard, Esther is a great example of who to be in those situations. And I think that that's something that I'm going to be looking up to for.
Well, I would agree with that. Yeah, and something that I just had popping in my head is it's interesting how like, the whole thing was like that being reversed, because like the enemy thought he had his upper hand and he was winning, right? And he was going to get Mordecai, his enemy, on the pole, but then he ended up being on it, and it's kind of like what happened with the crucifixion, where like the enemy thought he had got us.
Yeah.
Because he had Jesus on the tree. But in reality, Jesus was undoing everything that he was thinking was going to happen. And so it's kind of a fun, like a
continuous, like.
No, it's
reminder.
like a hint or something.
Yeah.
Like an Easter egg to what's going to happen. But,
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to
describe
it.
That's what I would add.
Yeah, I love it. Well, let us know what you guys think in the comments below. We'll be doing another live stream next Tuesday, but next Tuesday, we're actually going to be back in Florida. We have some great plans coming, so make sure to join us in person if you can, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye! Jesus bless you.